you know, it's really funny to me. When I was originally planning this, I was going to give all of this mechanical discussion just a single video. Guess that hasn't really worked out. Today, guys, I'm going to be talking about Samarog, who is a very cool boss. This is the third encounter. If you've missed the previous encounters, feel free to click the link on screen. But Samarog is a very, very, very fun one. Samarog, I've got a really interesting, weird story for you all. And if you want a bit of insight into what raiding's like in Guild Wars 2, well, look no further than one of this most recent encounters they just put out. So Samarog took us a little bit longer than the other two bosses. This was where now the wing felt like it wasn't easy mode, but it still was nothing crazy. It still didn't take that long to get through. My first time doing this, I actually was playing a Chronomancer. I'm not sure whether much footage will really appear here, but suffice it to say, it had been a few hours now and fatigue was starting to kick in. We still opted at this point to play with very easy, very comfortable builds in terms of rotations and things, and tried to focus as much on mechanics. Here's a funny story about this as well. When we first went to this boss, we had a few AFK people, and I thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool to see what the challenge mode looks like? So I toggled it on. We went in, we saw what it was like. It was like, wow, this boss is insane. This is very cool. We didn't understand what was going on. I swear to God, I toggled it off, but it actually wasn't toggled off, and we didn't realize it. And for a little while, we were actually doing progression, challenge mode progression, our first ever experience of this boss. And boy, does it look like a no-nonsense, really fun, crazy boss on challenge mode. In fact, when we finally realized the mistake we'd made and turned challenge mode off, it was kind of lame, actually. The boss felt a lot more simple, and, you know, being thrown into the fire at the start there, I think probably served us quite well. I'm tempted to say that this guy has the coolest looking design, but I think that would be a lie just because of what the fourth encounter is. But he is super cool and definitely one of my favorite minis out there. When I was looking at the minis before I actually got to this encounter, I was very excited seeing this double spear wielding dude, and the ambience of the raid had set up so well that someone had been attacking people with spears before now. Pretty excellent. So this is a prisoner that took up his duties very seriously once everyone else left, and is now sort of domineering and looking over the jail. Very, very cool. Also, it's a fight that isn't on a circular platform. It still functions as a circular platform. If you walk out of bounds, you're going to die, but this time it's because of spears pointing in all over the place. And I don't know, it's just a nice bit of a change up, and it's pretty cool. Basic things about this is fixation tanking, no toughness tanking here. Again, the wing has still failed to do it at this point, and I thought that it may not be a thing whatsoever. The first player to go into the room will get fixation first, and then every 10% of this guy's health, something special happens, and then someone else changes. So fixation being the idea of who is actually the tank. So that one player will carry everyone around. Definitely treat this like some of the other bosses, where you have one person in front, and everyone else stands on his bum and does all of their damage from his bum and misses, you know, gets more time, to evade certain attacks that I'll talk about in a second. So that's kind of the main thing. Also, because of our original strategy, this boss had us push into condition damage a lot, and that's something that the last boss did too. So it was kind of weird for a while. I felt like this was a very Condi heavy raid wing. It's not necessarily, though. It was kind of a bug, and there's a big story I've got to give you guys about that bug, so get ready for that. But yeah, I've beat it twice now. One time we ran almost entirely Condis, a pure Condi comp, and the second time we ran pure Condi except me on a glass Ellie, which might be what you're seeing more footage of than the Chronomancer. So Condi definitely does have a place at the very least, but when you hear the story, you'll know why maybe it's not super important. So yeah, those are the basic facts of the fight. Let's talk about Samarog and what he does. So let's highlight his first attack, right? His main attack is a wave. He's like Tequatl the Sunless, you know, the giant dragon world boss in the open world who launches waves at people that do damage. Or perhaps in the Fractals of the Mist, if you're familiar with that, the Molten Duo boss, and they get the waves that you have to jump over or dodge. It's just like this. Samarog has got lots of limbs, and he'll put a front paw forward and slam. That does damage, but if you're stacking behind the boss, no one except the tank has to worry about that, the person with fixation. Then he does it with his other paw, and then he slams both down and creates a shockwave. Now, the shockwave you can dodge into, you can distort through, you can just press the spacebar and jump over. For a while, I was very good at jumping this. I think in the footage you're seeing here, I've now opted to not jump because we're so tired at the time, but you can very, very comfortably jump this, and as a result, the Samarog fight, really, you don't even need to dodge that many things, in my opinion. You just need to watch, and it's a very, very easy animation to see. In fact, everything I would say about Samarog, it's all really easy once you've just read what it is he's doing. Most of this fight was just seeing what the animations were, and then once you know what the animations are, it's smooth sailing. Trust me. This guy will throw his first paw down, and then you know a shockwave's coming, and then it's like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Finally, you have to jump. You get so much lead in to knowing when you actually need to evade this thing, or you know, jump over it, dodge into it, whatever. I would suggest, just like with Tequatl, you dodge into the wave, not away from the wave. Dodging into the wave lets you pass through it very quickly, and then it's not a threat to you. But if you dodge like moving with it, then your dodge is going to end, and you could still be in range of it, and then you might still get knocked back. But the shockwave's kind of interesting in what it does. It does damage, but it also knocks you back in a weird way. It's not like a classic Guild Wars 2 blowout. It's a big launch. It's almost like that you've hit a jump pad. You get this spinning animation, you go spiraling off to the side, a long distance. And why is this important? Again, remember the sides of the arena? Spikes. If you get hit by the shockwave, you're going to take damage, and then you're going to go into the spikes, and it is brutal. If you miss it, it's brutal. As the fight progresses and more things are going on, it could very well spell a snowball and a death for that character that gets hit by it. This is exactly what I think raids need. Very readable, very obvious tells, but with punishing results if you don't play around them, and that's really where the fun comes from. It feels really good to jump over each of these shockwaves, for example, to preserve a fire overload or whatever long ability you might be in the middle of casting if you're on a relevant class for that kind of thing. So yeah, that's the main ability. Once you're used to that, you've mostly got a lot of the fight down pat, but there's another ability too. This is what we were calling sideswipe. So again, this is incredibly readable. Again, it's a big knockback. It's actually 2 hits. Basically, what Samarog will do is he's going to take his spears and he's going to swipe across horizontally, and he's going to hit everyone in sort of that plane that's in the way of that spear. And then once he's swung it once, he's going to swing it back again. So 2 hits, one to the right and then the other one to the left. And you have to avoid this. Again, this is a massive knockback. Again, it's the same risk as that wave. The funny thing about the sideswipe, okay, is the devs seem to be playing with something. You remember how we have a fixated player out front and everyone else is stacking behind the boss? Well, the sideswipe, the Samarog will deliberately turn away from the tank, look at the bulk of the party, and then swipe at them instead. So you can see what the devs are doing there. They're saying, oh, we don't want this massive ability to just be wasted on a single tank who's just going to pop a little block and is going to ignore it. We want this to hit everyone. But the funny thing is, that has made this ability even easier to avoid, in my opinion, or just as easy to avoid, because the sideswipe, you know it's coming, because Samarog spends a good second or two just turning around randomly. So if you ever in the Samarog fight see that Samarog is just starting to turn away from the fixation, you know that a sideswipe is coming, and you don't even have to dodge the sideswipe. Once he started doing this, you just walk into Samarog, like just behind him, like you walk inside his hitbox, and you'll avoid it really easily. If you've ever raided before, it's like at Veil Guardian, those blue goop bubbles that blink people around. You just take one tiny little step to the side and you avoid the entire thing. That's the same for sideswipe. You see that a sideswipe is starting and you take a tiny little step closer to fixation and you avoid it. And the best thing is, it's a slow animation and you get all this time to tell when it's coming. You just see the second he's turning, again, it's like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you comfortably evade it. So just like the shockwave, both of these two staple abilities that Samarog uses, very easily avoided, just looking at these little things. And you don't need an evade for either of them. You don't even have to press your spacebar. You can probably kill Samarog with 0 dodges used on all 10 players. Seriously, unless maybe there's something major I'm forgetting right now. Very, very, very cool stuff once you're used to it. And once all 10 people are clear with that, I think this is a very comfortable kill, to be honest. Those are the two main ones. Let's talk about some other stuff that happens. So every time you chip away 10% of Samarog's health, he's going to get a break bar. So what this is, if you've raided before, is kind of a combination of the Slothazor mechanic and the Matthias mechanic. So every 10%, Samarog grabs one of your players and gets a break bar. If you don't break the break bar, he's going to keep eating that player. And if that player dies, their health goes to 0 while they're being eaten. They can be healed through it. But say he grabs someone who was already low health. And he's going to try and eat them. And if they get to 0 health, they don't go down state. They get instantly defeated. So again, this is a lot like Matthias, where Matthias will choose someone to be sacrificed. And you have to save them by breaking a break bar. Same thing here with Samarog. You have to break the break bar so that he doesn't eat one of your allies. Now, if everyone's very healthy all the time and avoiding all of the abilities, then Samarog will try and eat someone who's already on 100% health, and you get tons of time. But if it's quite late in the fight and that person is sort of low on health already, then you're going to have a problem because Samarog's going to jump on him and you only get a couple of seconds and then he might eat them. So there's an interesting dynamic there. The other thing as well is it's when he hits 10%, Samarog, the person he chooses to eat, that person is the person who's furthest away. So you can always know who he's going to try and eat and maybe play into that by deliberately making yourself the person furthest away. But remember how sideswipe works and remember how the shockwave works. Both of these are big knockbacks. And if they haven't knocked you into the spike and instantly killed you, you then are low health, far away from the group, and then Samarog might suddenly jump on you and try and eat you. And now you're not near people and your druids can't heal you easily, and then you're going to get instantly defeated. So you can see how these two abilities, or three abilities, kind of snowball into one another. And Samarog does that a lot. If you're missing these kind of very comfortable foundation skills he uses, then that can snowball the group out. And you see that a lot here, and definitely a lot in the 4th encounter too. But it's really cool to see how the devs have designed that to make them sort of interact in these cool ways. And of course, if you see someone's low and far away, you can all hold your damage and maybe not trigger the break bar. But yeah, the other thing, the reason why this is a bit like Slothazor is while Samarog is doing this, he's also insanely tanky. I suppose it's a bit like the jellyfish from Fractals of the Mists too. He's insanely tanky. He takes a lot less damage, so you want to break the break bar to get damage back on him, to save a friend's life, and, you know, to go about on your way. So those are kind of the 3 main things that will continuously happen. Also, every 10%, the fixation will swap. So this is where things start to get a little bit more complicated. You've got your tank. The first person who went in was fixated. That's fine. But then you've just hit him to 10%. Samarog's chosen someone else now. And fixation's changed. And now it's someone else who has to sort of hold his aggro out front. And, you know, you got to, if you're that person, you need to be absolutely clear to people that you are that person. So I was on a glass Ellie, and when I got fixation, if we were doing the strategy where I was holding him and everyone else was behind him, I would die very quickly. So I'd call to people, listen, I'm fixated, I'm probably going to go down. And they'd just be prepared for the quick res on that. And then fixation would have swapped anyway. Or, you know, maybe they can play a little bit closer and a little bit more conservatively. So that's something you want to watch out for. The majority of the fight, guys, is this until you get a lot of damage in. Alright, so let's talk about what happens at 66% health. When you get 1/3 of Samarog's health gone, he's going to retreat. He doesn't like you anymore, and he's going to leave. He's going to become invulnerable. This is a transition phase. Samarog will be stood out of the way on a balcony where he's throwing spears at you. I'll get to that in a second. But instead, you are tasked with killing 2 different bosses. Right. And this is where we get a little bit of story time. So, these 2 bosses spawn. It's a Jotun called Gildum and a human named Rigum. I'm not quite sure whether this is a reference to something, but these 2 guys, your entire objective is to kill the Jotun. You've got to kill Gildum, and the Jotun himself is very tanky. There's a new mechanic to Guild Wars here, something we haven't seen before. It's very weird. What is going on is all the damage, like every time you hit the Jotun, all the conditions you apply to the Jotun, all the stuns you apply to the Jotun, the blowouts, any crowd control, anything, everything you do to the Jotun Gildum, instead gets transferred magically to Rigum, the human. And the human is the one that's getting hit, and the human doesn't have much health, and it blows the human up, and your enemy, human, Rigum dies. Rigum dies very, very fast. The weird thing is, though, that then Rigum will respawn. and then take all the damage again, and then he'll die, and then he'll respawn, and then he'll die, and then he'll respawn, and he'll die, and he'll respawn. And so what you can see is going on here is it's essentially meaning you cannot kill the Jotun. Your objective is to kill the Jotun, but you can't do it because the human is taking all of the hits. The Jotun is effectively invincible. The only time you can actually do damage to the Jotun, when I was playing, and there's been a patch, so this is a whole story we're going to go through, but while I was playing, the only way you could do damage to the Jotun was with conditions in a brief couple of seconds when the human died. So the human dies, respawns, and in those couple of seconds after he respawns, he's invulnerable and then can't take any stuff from Gildem. And in those very few seconds, all your condition damage would finally hit the Jotun. And so it seemed that on paper, this was how the fight was supposed to go. You were just supposed to hit the Jotun really hard with condi damage, and you can just straight up kill him, because all of those little moments where the human's dead, the Jotun can't shake his conditions off anymore, and he takes damage. There is a complication to that, though. The complication is this, that if the two bosses stand next to each other, then the Jotun will gain stacks of permanent extra damage. And the Jotun can really hurt if you let him get enough stacks. More importantly, though, if the human is stood next to the Jotun, Rigum, the human will gain tons of stacks of health, hundreds of thousands of extra health. So if you let them stand together, all of a sudden the human gets really tanky, you can't kill the human really quickly, and the phase becomes almost, under this light, almost impossible to do, because the Jotun just sheds everything off onto now an equally tanky human, and then you get like 1 second, and then it takes a minute before you get another second of damage uptime. So it kind of seems like quite obvious what the devs were saying here. Just don't let the two bosses stand together. This is a bit like an Ascalon Catacombs boss from the launch of the game in 2012. And this is fairly easy to accomplish. Keeping the two bosses away, you can do really comfortably, because think about this. The human is constantly stunned and immobilized and crippled and chilled and whatever else the hell you want to do, because you're hitting the Jotun. So the human barely is able to move that much. If you can establish a scenario where you have the two bosses spread out, then it takes a long time for the human to get close enough for the two of them to get stacks, and it seemed like that's what the devs were going for. Hopefully what I've established here is this was a really fiddly, weird little game that the devs seem to have set up here. We did find a way through it. From what we understood, our strategy was to first establish a scenario where the Jotun was in one corner of the room and the human was really far away. And we did a very cool little strategy here where I'd stand like right in the very corner, and I would get fixation from the Jotun, pull the Jotun along. The Jotun could move a lot easier than the human because the Jotun's never getting CC'd, really. And when he's in the corner, the human will now slowly start making progress towards us because he gets a little bit of invulnerability every time he dies. So he's going to keep moving a little by little. The human, Rigum, will get closer and closer and closer. And when he's just about close enough, we pull the Jotun to another corner. And then Rigum has to run all the way to that corner. And then we pull him to another corner. And then Rigum has to run, as you can see that we're doing here. You'll see with my skills, I'm prioritizing condition damage stuff. I'm actually popping Signet of Fire on the Jotun. I'm using fire overloads and stuff. And I'm clearing some other things in the room, which we'll talk about in just a second. And that's basically the phase. That's how we dealt with it. And now it's been nerfed. The reason it's been nerfed is because all of that was a load of crap. We were supposed to not be able to DPS the Jotun at all. The fact that condition damage was getting through was just a fluke. That's now been changed. Apparently, there's a mechanic where you just need to move the human into Samarog on the balcony, and then you can flat damage them. So there you go. Apparently, the way we dealt with this is totally wrong and not something the devs anticipated. It did push us close to Enrage, and honestly, you don't hit Enrage much in Guild Wars 2. It did push us closer to Enrage. I think the first kill on our Samarog, we were in Enrage because these phases took a long time. And they were quite boring to play, honestly. We should have known that we'd missed something, but we kind of maybe tunnel visioned a little bit on this condition damage idea, and that's how we cleared it. So now it's a little bit different. You're just supposed to pull the human into the balcony, and you kill him that way, and everyone can do lots of damage. It's a very peculiar strat. I thought you guys might be interested in that and how we did it. I thought it was pretty fun because I was the only power person in our group on this run that you're seeing here. And actually, I had kind of another little role. So Samarog, during this phase, he's just stood at the balcony, and what he's doing is throwing spears in. These spears are either known as spears of aggression or spears of repulsion. And especially if you're doing challenge mode and other areas in the fight, they'll just keep spawning these big spears. The aggression ones do damage to you and taunt you in. The repulsion ones fear you away. The fear ones are particularly deadly because they can fear you into the edges of the arena and get you caught on the spikes. So as the power player, what I was doing was as we were pulling Gildem around, I would just make sure I had all the spears in the places we were going to, clear of, you know, any obstacles for us so that we could keep on moving. And that was kind of my role, while everyone else was just constantly damaging the hell out of the Jotun. And that was our strategy. It worked. It was slow. It was a bit boring, but it was smooth, and we definitely got to grips with it. But now I think that the whole phase will go a lot quicker. And honestly, the fight, you shouldn't get anywhere near enraged by doing it the way that the developers actually intended us to. So yeah, yes, those spears will continue to spawn. That is a threat to you as you continue once Samarog returns to the arena. You're going to do another 33% damage now to get him to another transition phase where you do the same thing again. But there are a couple of other mechanics that start dropping in, and this is where things get a little bit more complicated. Now, right at the end of the fight, Samarog does get a new ability when we're back to the regular encounter now. He slams spears down in front of him. Again, it's a very slow animation. I think it does a lot of damage. I didn't really see this trigger that much because we killed him quite quickly once we got to this point. It's kind of a bit of a weird mechanic in that it didn't really pose much threat. I sort of feel like he should have this the entire way through the match. Maybe there's something I'm missing, and I would love to hear in the comments if you guys know more about this. But yeah, he does a slam. You just avoid it in the same way that you'd avoid anything else that he's been doing to you. And then lastly, there is a very, very, very interesting mechanic, and something that they will reuse in the fourth encounter. This mechanic is what we called kissing, because we're lovely people. Kissing is, Samarog is going to, as the fight's going on, while he's doing all of his other stuff, just randomly choose a player who he's going to toss a spear at. And when he tosses a spear at this player, if that player doesn't play around this, they will die, instantly defeated. And this is just going to keep pulsing. A player's going to get chosen, and then a player's going to get chosen, and a player's going to get chosen, and spears are going to land on these players, and they're going to get defeated. The only way to save someone from being killed by this spear is on someone else's shoulders. See, at the same time that someone is chosen to have a spear thrown at them, another member of your group, who is completely not at risk, will have a little green circle under them. And that player has to go and stand next to the one who is getting hit with the spear. And as long as the perfect player stands next to the one who's going to get hit with the spear, then both of them survive. So the idea is, if you are going to get a spear thrown at you, you need to move away and say, someone help me, someone help me, someone help me. Everyone looks and sees if they're the special player, and then they run over, the two of you hold hands, the spear lands, it does no damage, and you go back into the fight. And it's kind of, we called it kissing because it's like two players move away from the group to kiss for a second, and then they run back in. And that's kind of how you deal with that mechanic. The really important thing to understand about this last mechanic here is that the player who's getting hit with the spear won't just get defeated, but when that spear lands, it's going to explode and hurt everyone who stood in range of it, except the one special player. Except the one special player. So what happens is someone's going to get selected by Samarog. They know a spear's going to land on them. That person has to walk away so that they don't explode everyone else. And then the one special person comes in to join them. So two people move out of the stack, come together, they survive, and then everybody moves back in. Nobody gets hurt. Where this gets really tricky is now you can imagine how this snowballs with everything else we were talking about. What if someone's chosen to be hit by one of these special spears, they walk out, their partner comes to kiss them, but oh dear, Samarog's just done his wave attack. And one of them hasn't jumped. So now one of them's been knocked back. The other one did jump it. They're no longer together. The spear instantly defeats someone, knocks the other guy out. And everything just snowballs from there. So my main thing would be, when this mechanic starts, my main advice to you guys, once this begins, is always, if you are the guy chosen with the spear, stand in a place where you're not going to get hit by Samarog's waves or by his sideswipe. Those two will be deadly. And again, you can imagine these other spears that are getting thrown around, the spears of aggression and repulsion that we discussed earlier. If those are in, not being cleared adequately, you get less and less and less space to deal with this. When we were struggling with Samarog, it was always towards the end where the fight isn't really that different, but one little mistake can just chain react all these issues into one another. Imagine that someone's just had been chosen for a special spear, something very minor has been messed up, and then a break bar's begun, and Samarog's just leapt on someone, and now everything's getting thrown into your face all at once. And that's really the main thing with Samarog. You need to keep your cool towards the end and not let all of these mechanics snowball into one another, because they do have the tendency to do that. And that's it really, guys. He's a hell of a fun fight, a very, very, very cool experience. One of those fights I think that it's very satisfying to learn his animations and dodge them, and I don't think unfair really in any way. There are some slightly unfair things, and maybe challenge mode is a lot worse. See, I mentioned at the start of this video that the fight felt really easy to me at first because we had accidentally been doing challenge mode. Challenge mode changes things amazingly. You can't clear the spears of aggression and repulsion. There will be tons of them. Samarog starts pulling them in on challenge mode. The kissing players can't move. You're stunned when you're picked, so everyone else has to move. You get the kissing mechanic right at the start. Everything's happening all at once right at the beginning on challenge mode. So we got really thrown into the fire. We learned the last bits very early on, and then that served us in good stead when we got to the end of the normal version. So it really seems like one of these encounters maybe where the devs have tuned it to be a bit easier to let people get at the juicier story for the normal mode, and challenge is where the epic challenge truly lies. Maybe I'll be able to talk to you guys about that in a future video if I ever get around to doing it. But yeah, that's Samarog, guys. That's how this encounter works. I'm glad to have done a dedicated video on it. Hopefully this has helped you, given you some insight. I know not everybody can raid. These aren't really meant to be hardcore guides for people. There are going to be other groups who are way better than mine and play way more than me and have much better insight. But this is what Guild Wars 2 raiding is, and I think because it is only a subset of the community that gets to experience it, it's only worthwhile because I've got a platform to share it out with you all. So there you go, guys. Thanks very much for watching. Tune in next time for the most epic, crazy nutball encounter of the wing with a mysterious shackled prisoner and Deimos.